Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Semeghini from Clean Transportation Communities of Southern Connecticut. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we will talk about PURA's new decision to create Connecticut's medium and heavy-duty EV program, and we will explain what that means for school bus electrification in the state. We will also share findings from our study on grid readiness, talk about the impacts of diesel emissions, and review the state incentives and funding opportunities that can help school districts with this transition. So a quick overview of the agenda. Today in this meeting, we'll have several different stakeholders who are part of the electrification process. That includes members of boards of education, school district staff, parents, community organizations, and transportation providers, all among the audience. And as our panelists today, we are joined by Dan Charcher from CTC, who will present CTC's Electric Power Capacity Report, Kevin Moss from the Connecticut Green Bank, who will give us an overview of the PURA docket and the Green Bank's Fleet Electrification Acceleration Program, Charles Rothenberger from Save the Sound, who speaks about the impacts of diesel emissions, and Paul Chrysler from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, who will discuss state funding opportunities for school bus electrification. After our speakers, we will open the floor for a Q&A session where everyone is welcome to share questions. So please feel free to enter them in the chat. I will start with a brief overview of our organization for those who may not be familiar with our work. So we are one of 3 coalitions in Connecticut, and we are part of a network of 80 coalitions across the country. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to accelerate the adoption of clean fuels in transportation. And we serve New Haven, Middlesex, and New London counties. And we are considered the boots on the ground for the Department of Energy alternative fuel programs. We add value by acting as an intermediary between fleets and state and federal policy, as well as between fleets and new technologies and innovators. And so far, we have been supporting school districts across the 3 counties of New London, Middlesex, and New Haven. We collaborate with state and federal policymakers to address both the opportunities and the challenges of school bus electrification. We also support districts in navigating the state mandate, which requires electrification by 2030 for school districts with environmental justice communities and by 2040 for all other districts. We also assist districts with the EPA Clean Transportation, Clean School Bus Program, from planning applications to post-award implementation as well. And our work also includes workforce development, such as workshop for school district staff on school bus electrification and training for first responders on EV fire preparedness in partnership with the National Fire Protection Association. We also have new projects on the horizon, so please stay tuned for more updates. And our role is to support this transition in every way we can. Now, I will invite Dan Charcher to discuss our power capacity assessment and briefly introduce himself. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Anna. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Chacha. I'm a carbon consultant with a company called Eco Engineers. I focus personally on electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, and other low carbon transportation fuels. And we provide advisory services to project developers, mainly at the intersection of carbon reduction and the carbon markets and regulations. But I also support the CTC here in Connecticut, which Anna just did a great job of describing the background of. I'm going to spend a few minutes this morning to discuss the state of school bus electrification in Connecticut and to also discuss a study that the CTC recently completed. As you can see by this map, electric school buses are here. They're in the state. Today, there are at least 70 school buses operating across the state and almost 250 more awaiting delivery to put into service. So this isn't a future technology. It's not theoretical. At some day, we'll be able to do this. These are real school buses transporting real students and experiencing the benefits of electrification right now across Connecticut. You can see by the map that the concentration of buses is, kind of heavily focused along the major arteries and population centers, including Hartford, New Haven, and Fairfield counties. But the technology is equally viable in all corners of the state. As with any major transition, there are benefits and challenges. We've listed some of them here, the highest cited benefits and challenges of electrification. Fortunately, the benefits are quite compelling, and the challenges tend to fade with each generation of technology that gets released. With electric buses, there are no tailpipe emissions, which is clearly a compelling reason to electrify at the schools because it keeps our children healthier. They wouldn't be breathing those gas and diesel fumes while waiting for the bus or riding it. Anna, can you go back one slide, please? Um, there are also no overall emissions when factoring in the electricity generation that's needed to propel the electric buses. The electric buses will reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall by 65 to 75%. So that's quite compelling on the climate change perspective. In addition to other airborne health benefits, electric buses are quieter. The noise level on a conventional vehicle is about 85 decibels, which is actually in the harmful range when you're exposed to it consistently. In an electric bus, it is about 20 decibels lower at a very comfortable conversational level. Um, the total cost of ownership is lower with an electric bus over the life of a vehicle. So this is when you're factoring in all the maintenance over time and the electricity costs compared to the fuel costs. It varies a lot, of course, depending on the circumstances of an individual vehicle and location and use, but studies have repeatedly reached this conclusion. And then the performance of an electric bus is superior to a conventional vehicle. Some bus depots are starting the diesel engines 2 hours before the school day to warm up the engines. That's not necessary with electric. Acceleration is smoother and quicker, and energy is captured when braking, so it's a less jerky ride. But there are challenges with electrification. The biggest one being the upfront vehicle cost is quite a bit higher than conventional buses. It can be 3x of a conventional bus without incentives. And most districts in Connecticut have engaged in complex leasing contracts with the bus operators, which will need to be negotiated or renegotiated to include electric buses. Fortunately, the state of Connecticut has loosened up the rules a bit on this so that school districts can more freely engage in longer contracts with providers. This makes the economics for electric buses work better. And then there are challenges with the charging of the buses. It's a different operation than fueling a vehicle. So needing to have dwell time to charge. Can a district actually charge that many battery packs at one place at one time? And can the grid handle that transition? So to these last couple of bullets, that's what the study that I'm going to discuss now addresses and gets into a little bit more detail. So the CTC underwent a study to look at the electric capacity in Connecticut for electric bus charging. We had a couple of goals in mind. One was to determine the state of the Connecticut electrical grid for charging of electric buses. Is there enough capacity? And is that capacity located in the right places and at the right time to meet the needs of the school districts? Our intent for this was to make this a data-driven analysis, not a theoretical study. So we want this to be meaningful and to help guide decision makers in school districts and policymakers. The methodology was pretty straightforward. CTC focused on the 60 school districts in the 3-county service area of the organization, interviewing each of these 60 districts to identify the number of buses, types of vehicles, the fuels being used, the mileage driven on the routes, and time the vehicles parked at the depot, which we refer to as dwell time. The CTC then reached out to the electrical utilities in these districts and utilized the public service maps to determine what electric supply was available at each of the depot location in the district. So not just what's available in the district, but what's available where the buses are actually residing and spending their nights sleeping. And then taking all of this data and analyzing it to determine how many buses could be electrified today with the grid power that's available and the capacity that's available today. To do this, we had to make some assumptions. We made the assumptions of fairly conservative to make this analysis practical with a healthy margin of safety. So we used 85 miles for any districts that weren't able to provide route information for us. That was, we chose 85 because that was the highest route range of any of the districts that did report. So that was the outlier that we used across as a default. 1.5 kilowatt hours of electricity would be assumed to propel a bus for a mile. So that accounts for loading of passengers and weather variations as well. Um, we assume that every bus would have a dedicated level 2 charger to charge overnight. Since this was the most cost-effective means to charge the buses, wanted to make sure this was a viable approach. Faster charging could be used instead of level 2 charging, but that wouldn't necessarily change the results of the analysis. It would just change sort of how the operations work at the depot. And then we assume that every bus has at least a 10-hour of dwell time. That is, that it's idle for 10 hours at the depot, even though most buses probably have a much higher dwell time, closer to 14 hours. So what we found was that the results we're pleasantly surprised by the results at how ready the state of Connecticut is for electrification of school buses in the districts. So the CTC was able to get complete data from 2/3 of the districts interviewed, which was a great response rate. We focused the study and the analysis on those 40 districts that we had the complete data for. They provide a diverse representation of city and rural districts and depict the entire state quite well. Within these districts, there were 2,100 vehicles, total vehicles in the fleets for the schools. And those include vans and smaller buses, as well as the full-size Class C buses. Um, a full 90% of the districts that we did this research on have enough power capacity today to charge every one of their buses if they electrified every bus in their fleet. So that's pretty compelling. 90% are completely ready today. There would be some interconnection work required at those sites, as there typically is with any EV charging installation, but the power is available and there would not need to be upgrades to the service or supply to those circuits at those depot locations. Out of those 36 sites that are fully ready for electrification today, two of them, New London and Regional 13, were marginal in their capacity, which simply means that they would need to invoke a scheduled charging scheme to be able to charge all their buses overnight. And that enables them to stagger the charging of the buses so they aren't all drawing power simultaneously. We typically refer to this type of charging as smart charging. So 90% of the districts are EV ready today. What about the other 10%? Next slide, please. The 4 districts that cannot fully convert to EV today are listed here: Middletown, Norwich, Regional 4, and North Haven. But even those that cannot convert all of their buses to electrification today, given the capacity of what's on their circuit, they could convert more than half of their buses and support that with what they have for capacity. So it varies by district. As you can see, Middletown could electrify actually 3/4 of their fleet, and whereas North Haven has very little capacity on their circuit right now and could only charge a few buses before maxing out the circuit. So it does vary a little bit there, but for the most part, every district could convert a good number of buses. Across the entire 40 districts that we got the data for, 93% of the buses could be converted to electric today and have enough capacity on their circuits at their existing depots. No changes needed at their depots to supply that power. What about those that don't have enough capacity, though? There are other solutions that could be looked at. There are many strategies that they could look at to solve this problem, such as performing some of that charging at the schools while they're waiting during the school day. They could charge at the schools instead of back at the depot, or perhaps staggering the dwell time. If the schools are starting at different times of day, they could stagger the dwell times to start some of the charging earlier. Also, there could be a satellite depot somewhere else in the town to provide some of that charging as needed. So there are solutions, strategic solutions that could be employed to mitigate those that don't have enough capacity. Finally, it should be noted that the data presented here was a snapshot in time, and there may be changes coming to the grid in the future that could increase or decrease the capacity at any one of these depots. Final slide, please. The study results are effective for allaying any concerns that the state does not have enough power capacity to electrify. So that should not be an issue for districts to electrify their buses. But there are additional factors a district may want to consider as they're starting to embark on this journey to electrify their school buses. The decision of what type of charging equipment and features will affect budget and operational processes. So those will need to be kind of considered. The district will have an appetite for, does the district have an appetite for installing solar panels or other types of clean power generation? Are the districts subject to demand charges that make it more expensive to charge during certain hours? And we haven't discussed vehicle to grid here, but there is a technology emerging that would allow districts to potentially turn their buses into a source of revenue for allowing the utilities to use their battery for energy storage during the night or during peak power demand. And then finally, what are the local and state regulatory drivers that need to be considered as electrification? But districts are not alone in this journey. There are, as we pointed out, already many districts who have started on this path. You can start by reaching out to your utility for more information on the process, your bus operators to find out what electrification offers they have available, and your local advocacy groups to understand the regulations and incentives, such as the CTC. So the CTC is here to provide guidance, and we encourage you to follow up with us, and we're here to help you with navigating this transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. If anyone has any question about this study, please include them in the chat. We will go over the questions at the end. Dan, thank you so much. Now we'll welcome Kevin Moss to discuss the PURA docket and also Green Bank's Fleet Electrification Acceleration Program. So welcome, Kevin.
Great, thanks, Anna. Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks to CTC for organizing this important discussion today. I'm Kevin Moss. I'm the Senior Manager for Clean Transportation at the Connecticut Green Bank, and I spend the majority of my time on school bus electrification projects. Next slide, Anna. So today I'll mainly be just giving the core information from the decision itself. I'm really aiming for a, I'd say, informative yet accessible level of detail. And to the point about the setting out the slides, after I've done my best to include all of the relevant links in my presentation to make it easy for folks to find various resources. Next slide on. So at the Green Bank, I'd say that our core goal and mission is described in the left column here, which is to leverage limited public dollars to de-risk various clean energy and clean transportation investments to rally more private capital in so that we can get to scale with a whole host of clean energy technologies. So that most of my work on the electric school bus side is on the middle and right columns in terms of pursuing investments that help advance markets and then also particularly strengthen Connecticut's communities. To Dan's point, I think there's a lot to do with public health and air quality. I know Charles is going to talk about that as more. Next slide, Anna. Great. So as I mentioned, the decision link is here in the slide itself and the full title as well. So in terms of the overall framework, there were 3 priority vehicles that PURA focused on in this proceeding. In the kind of 1A bucket were school buses and transit buses, given the state requirements related to deployment goals for both of those vehicle types. And then delivery fleets were sort of the 1B focus. And then in terms of the critical aspects for each of those vehicles, there were make-ready infrastructure and charging station incentives to cover the fixed costs with launching some of these fleets. There's the rate structure, the utility bill component for the marginal costs, and then there was also a fleet advisory services angle as well, which is essentially a technical assistance offering that'll be led by the Green Bank. And then the program administrator for this program is still to be determined. Next slide. Perfect. So in terms of what make-ready infrastructure is, it's essentially all of the equipment in between the charger itself and the utility service, all of the transformers that might be involved, the switchgear, and then all of the trenching and wiring as well. These costs can be significant with deploying a fleet of medium and heavy duty vehicles. So there is a pilot incentive that's been created. Next slide, Anna. So as I was mentioning with that pilot incentive, the current plan is to do up to 2 projects in each EDC, electric distribution company territory in Connecticut. So 2 in Eversource territory, 2 in UI. And then those projects will be in disadvantaged communities. The exact meaning of that is still TBD. That's something that the program administrator and the Green Bank will work on. But I'd say that generally speaking, it's going to be, somewhat tethered to the 2030 deployment requirements that are outlined in the Connecticut Clean Air Act. And if folks want to see all the details of those, the full text and the summary of that legislation is in the slide. And then in terms of the infrastructure incentive offering itself, it's $1,300 per kilowatt, up to 3 megawatts of capacity per site. So to essentially assess what the maximum level could be, you would essentially sum up the full capacity of all of the chargers that are going in and then multiply that by $1,300. So for a smaller deployment of 10 vehicles, if they were all using 30 kilowatt chargers, the maximum incentive would be $390,000 for that potential pilot project. And then those uses can cover some of the customer side and utility side costs that I mentioned on the previous slide. There's also a EV charging station component as well that can be paired with this, and that is up to 50% of the cost of the charging station, up to $400,000 per site. And so I'd say getting into one of these pilot opportunities is really intriguing and would really help cover a lot of the infrastructure costs associated with launching an initial electric school bus fleet. One requirement is that to access the incentive, you do need an electrification plan, and that can be developed through the accelerator program that the Green Bank is launching or independently developed. Next slide, Anna. And then Dan was talking to this issue quite a bit, but there are hosting capacity maps available that the EDCs offer. And so you can go in and essentially input your address for your school bus yard and sort of get a snapshot of the current electrical capacity that's available at the site. So the Green Bank is going to be supporting a large electric school bus deployment in Branford. That project is 49 buses, 1.6 megawatts of electricity could be consumed with peak usage. And so if we look on the map, we can see that at that site, there's 3.6 megawatts available. And so that buffer of 2 megawatts is indicative that there is currently enough power to serve that potential load at the site, which is great. And I'd say, generally speaking, one cost indicator, as Dan was saying, is that if there is not enough power available at the site, that can lead to much more significant deployment costs to pull more power to the site. Thanks, Anna. You can go to the next slide. So that covers some of the fixed cost components that I was mentioning. Moving on to the marginal cost of actually charging the vehicles. So there has been a new rate offering that's been approved. If you look in the final decision, it's referred to as the scenario 1 rate. So in terms of the key components that influence how much what you pay for your electricity, The first component is the volume, how much electricity you consume in a month. There's also demand charges, which I think a lot of folks on the call will be familiar with, and that's essentially your peak demand, typically in a 15 or 30-minute window in the month. That's to reflect the kind of the strain that's put on the distribution system. And then there's also costs associated both with the transmission system, which is the New England grid, and then the distribution system, either Eversource or UI in Connecticut's case. And so electric vehicles, I'd say a lot of rates in general are sort of meant to serve various building use cases, but EVs and EV charging systems are a little bit different. I think they're can be thought about kind of like stadium lights, where a lot of power can be used really quickly, but in the course of a month, there may not be that huge amount of volume of electricity that's used. And so any demand charges that are included can have kind of an outsized effect on the average cost of electricity. And so with this new rate, it's much more, I'd say, finely tuned to the typical charging pattern of electric vehicles or an electric school bus fleet. And so a key factor in that is something called load factor. It's essentially a way to indicate how predictable electricity use is in a month. And so I'd say that buildings tend to have high load factors. I'd say their average consumption is relatively close to their peak consumption, but that can be a lot different for vehicle fleets. And so the billing components are going to be based on certain blocks of what a fleet's load factor is. And at the low load factors, the demand charges will be either zero or small, and the volume charges will be high. And then as you move across those load factors, your demand charges would increase and your volume charges would lower, to try and kind of keep everything in balance as a fleet gets larger and uses more electricity overall. And then there's also a time of use component to the rate as well that I'll cover on the next slide. And so, as I was saying, there are both transmission and distribution system components to what a fleet operator would pay for electricity. And so here in Connecticut, with this rate, like I was saying, the New England grid and your specific electricity provider influence that. The orange blocks on this chart show the on-peak times for the New England grid. The yellow blocks on the left show some of the on-peak times for Eversource and UI, and the red times are the times where those periods overlap. And so charging during the red windows would be the most expensive, and charging during the green would be the least expensive. And so if we see here, thinking about a school bus fleet, the off-peak times would start at 9 p.m. and then be available until 5 or 6 in the morning when the school buses need to leave the yard. And so that's plenty of time to fully charge an electric school bus. Next slide, Anna. And so as I was saying, all of these marginal costs have a big effect on the capacity to launch an electric school bus fleet. The Green Bank has done a lot of analysis as to what the costs, how it affects the total cost of ownership of a fleet. There's a screenshot on the right of from our total cost of ownership model. One really important thing that I want to emphasize for folks is that when this rate becomes available to enroll on no later than January 1st of next year, is that fleet operators are going to be placed on this, like the lowest load factor tier for sort of a slow start period. And so that essentially allows school bus fleets to learn in and not have to worry about demand charges for at least 12 months. It's going to be 12 months plus another set of months for when you launch the fleet in that year. And so if you were to launch a school bus fleet in August, you would have 17 months of no demand charges to essentially get comfortable with the technology, and then you would get assigned onto a load factor tier based on your charging patterns. And then one thing that's also really great is that in the meantime, you can get on sort of a temporary rate based on the light duty EV charging program. And for the school buses that have gotten on that, in the meantime, they've seen about 40% savings. And that rate uses the same structure as the one I just described. Next slide, Anna. Great. And so in terms of, I'd say key takeaways, the biggest one is just that this decision provides market certainty for any school bus operator in Connecticut who's maybe exploring electrification potential. We now know or have a good sense of approximately what electricity was going to cost. I'd say under the previous business as usual options, it really wasn't economical to launch school buses in Connecticut. But now with the new rate option, you're likely to see savings over either diesel or gas purchases, which is obviously crucial to reaching a positive total cost of ownership with electrification. And then I think the no demand charges component in that first 12 plus months is really great as well. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, the Green Bank has been selected by PURA to implement the technical assistance component of this program. So we've dubbed that the Fleet Electrification Accelerator. If you click on the actively recruiting link there in the slide, you'll go to our page, and my colleague Sarah just linked that page as well. We're currently in the process of launching our pilot cohort with CTEX at Reston Public Schools, and then we're actively recruiting for a post-winter break cohort as well. And both of these cohorts will be free for school districts and school bus operators in Connecticut distressed municipalities. All of those distressed municipalities are on the 2030 timeline for electrifying, so that's why we wanted to target the program. But even if you're not in one of those communities, I highly recommend you reach out, because I think we'll likely expand the program beyond those two initial cohorts. And then I'll talk about investments a little bit later. So Anna, you can go to the next slide. So on the planning side, these are some of the key items we're going to offer, essentially developing a district-specific roadmap that charts a realistic path to electrification and serves as I'd say a funding grant access tool as well. Next slide. And then on the back end, we are going to be offering a deployment support pathway, so that as school bus operators or schools are launching their fleets, they can have some hands-on assistance for that first 3 to 9 months of being comfortable with the fleet. And then I think my final slide is ahead, Anna. And then I did just want to make a quick plug for on the investment side. The Green Bank is really interested in creating I'd say a planning to investment pipeline. So far, our board has approved 3 electric school bus transactions that sum to a little bit over $15 million with 3 separate school bus providers in Connecticut. We're really excited about those, and those investments will support the launch of 77 electric school buses that'll transport approximately 6,000 students per day. And so we hope to repeat that model. And so I'd say that my main ask, Anna, you can go to the next slide, is just to get in touch. The Green Bank is really excited about this. The accelerator program that we're launching, we know that electricity planning is complicated, and so we're here to serve as a resource both on the planning side and investment side, and happy to take questions at the end.
That was great. Thank you, Kevin. Great work. We'll be sharing Kevin's contact information, and if anyone is interested in getting in touch with him or receiving technical assistance, we will be sharing forms on that as well. Thank you so much, Kevin. Now we will welcome Charles Rothenberger from Save the Sound. Charles, welcome.
There we are. Well, thank you. Great to be here. Obviously, our transportation sector, whether we're talking about light-duty vehicles or medium and heavy-duty vehicles or school buses, plays a big role in Connecticut when it comes to our air quality and our climate goals. So we can move on to the next slide. So I'll really be taking a 10,000-foot view of some of the policy and background considerations supporting the program. I think the starting goal has to be our Connecticut Global Warming Solutions Act, which we adopted back in 2008. It sets several targets for economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions beginning in 2020, which is in our rear view. And pleased to report we met that goal by the skin of our teeth, thanks to some unfortunate or fortunate circumstances, depending upon how you view the COVID-19 crisis. But as you can see, moving forward to 2030, 2040, and 2050, we do have accelerating emissions reductions requirements ahead of us. Um, and it's also informed by the multi-state medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle memorandum of understanding that Connecticut has signed with 17 other states, the District of Columbia and the province of Quebec. These are really aspirational, and the jurisdictions pledging to support and implement activities that will help to accelerate the deployment of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles within their jurisdictions. And you can see the targets are a 30% deployment based upon sales annually by 2030, and then a complete transition by 2050. We can go to the next slide. So every year, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection produces a greenhouse gas inventory report to chart the state's progress in meeting those targets under the Global Warming Solutions Act. They just released their latest report last month. And this breaks it out by sectors in terms of emissions over time. And you can see that red line at the top, that's our transportation emissions. If you were to sort of draw a bead from the beginning of that line to the tail of that line, you'd see that it's almost relatively flat. There have been some spikes for sure, and you can see that sharp dip towards the end of that scale. That reflects the period during COVID when there were far fewer vehicles on the road, but you can see already rebounding quite a bit. And obviously, as the largest portion of our greenhouse gas emissions, the transportation sector is one that we have to spend a fair amount of time figuring out how to handle. Electricity consumption, which is the green line, you can see a fairly sharp decline towards the end there, and a great trend overall. That reflects the success of many of the programs that we've implemented, including the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the increased deployment of renewable energy sources, and investments in energy efficiency. But overall, I think what this chart underscores is the significant work that's still needed to achieve our targets. We've seen some declines over the years, but on a fairly flat trajectory. And we're really going to need to bend that curve if we're going to meet our climate goals, reduce our energy costs, and ensure cleaner and healthier outcomes for our residents. So the next slide, please. And again, this underscores sort of the intractability of our transportation sector. In this chart, transportation is at the bottom in red. You can see in 1990, it represented about 34% of our overall climate emissions. In 2023, the last year for which we have data, it's more than 40% of those emissions. So growing as a percentage over time, even though as absolute number, it's remained relatively flat over that same period. The next slide. And this may not be as relevant for our discussion today. This is just sort of helps to explain the dynamic behind those transportation emissions. Obviously, our fuel economy standards are improving, which should be reducing our emissions as we burn less fuel per mile in our vehicles. However, we're also traveling a lot more. So that's sort of eroding all of the advancements and benefits that we're making in terms of fuel economy. So not as relevant for our discussion today on school buses, but just a helpful slide to sort of help visualize the dynamics that we face in the transportation sector. Next slide, please. And this really helps to underscore the importance of addressing our medium and heavy duty vehicle emissions. You can see on the pie chart, the large purple or mauve color is our transportation sector, again, about 40%, the lion's share. Medium and heavy duty vehicles are only about 6% of that transportation sector in terms of our on-road vehicles. but they do have a disproportionate impact when it comes to emissions. You can see, although representing 6% of the fleet, they account for 25% of those transportation emissions. We think about public health, they're more than half, 53% of our emissions of nitrous oxides, and again, 45% of emissions of particulate matter. And this is really important. Cleaning up these emissions is particularly important for the health of low and moderate income populations living in our dense urban communities along the state's major transportation corridors. I was pleased to see in terms of the electric school bus deployment to date that it has been occurring in those communities where the benefits will be the greatest. We can move to the next slide. And yeah, when it comes to diesel, it really is a health issue here in Connecticut. Diesel engines emit pollutants that aggravate a variety of health problems, including asthma, other respiratory diseases, and the fine particles, that particulate matter that we talked about in diesel exhaust, are a human carcinogen. And this diesel exhaust also contributes to area-wide air quality problems. And Connecticut has some severe problems when it comes to our overall air quality. It may not be immediately apparent to you if you look out your window, although if you compared photographs of the COVID era with today, you would notice a significant difference. But Connecticut has consistently failed to meet our federal air quality standards. And 3 counties in the state have been classified as severe non-attainment regions for those federal air quality standards. In addition, the Asthma and Allergy Foundation for America has ranked New Haven and Hartford as among the worst cities in the country for asthma, ranking number 5 and 17, respectively. And in 2022, Connecticut actually ranked 4th in the country for the highest percentage of adults with asthma and has a greater number of children with asthma, more than 8% than the national average. So these exposures to diesel emissions and exhaust from school buses, particularly important in a state like Connecticut that does struggle both with overall air quality, but also with significant numbers of children with asthma. And we've actually seen a number of several high-profile lawsuits against school bus companies here in the state for violating the state's anti-idling law, which is on the books to specifically address this issue. It's part of our federal state implementation plan for air quality. So obviously, as we transition to electric vehicles, the idling issues become irrelevant. And we heard earlier, again, the startup of these buses where they idle for significant amounts of time in the morning, which not great for the neighborhoods. We can move on to the next slide. So there was a reference in the Green Bank presentation to this act, but in 2022, Connecticut passed an omnibus transportation bill, which set out a number of milestones to help transition our medium and heavy duty fleet, really focused on state fleets and school buses. You heard mention that it did allow school boards to enter into longer transportation contracts, up to 10 years. That was something we heard from school districts themselves that would help them pencil out the additional costs for electric school bus by allowing them to amortize those costs over a longer period of time. It directed DEEP to establish a voucher program to help deploy additional zero-emission vehicles, including school buses. And then, as noted, set out a timeline for transitioning not only transit buses in the state, but also school buses. So you can see the targets there. By 2030, 100% of school buses in environmental justice communities need to be zero-emission school buses. By 2035, 100% of school buses statewide need to be either zero-emission or alternative fueled, and providing a little bit of a glide path. And then by 2040, 100% of buses, school buses statewide, have to be zero emissions. And this also authorized Connecticut to enter into or to join California's Advanced Clean Truck Program. As we all know, under the current federal administration, the authority of California to implement more stringent motor vehicle standards has been repealed, at least temporarily. We'll see where that ends up. Connecticut, independent of that, had previously elected not to follow that path for reasons of its own, but this was also something that was contemplated and authorized under this legislation. Next slide. And then I think Kevin did a great job explaining in sufficient but not too much detail the elements of PURA's recent decision in 210917, their vehicle charging framework. I would just add one thing. So in addition to the elements that Kevin described, they did also do a cost estimate analysis, which I think is important considering the cost of electricity is on everybody's mind these days, perhaps nowhere more than up at the state capitol. And it did provide an estimate of bill impacts, which you can see at the bottom there. So it differs between the Eversource and United Illuminating territories. For Eversource, the bill impact somewhere between 4 cents to 12 cents per month. And for United Illuminating, somewhere between 19 cents and 55 cents per month. So very modest bill impacts. I think this was obviously deliberately designed to be a modest program in the beginning with just the 4 pilot projects that were contemplated, as Kevin described, 2 in each of the EDC territories. So I think provides a great opportunity to sort of prove the model and provide the basis for scaling up moving forward. And I think that is my final slide. So thank you.
Thank you, Charles. We truly appreciate it. If anyone has any questions for Charles, please include them in the chat. He will be able to engage with you all through the comment section as well. And now we will welcome Paul from Deep. So Paul, welcome. We're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Anna. I appreciate it. And first off, just off the top, I would like to thank Charles for carrying a lot of the Connecticut DEP water there, as far as talking about the air quality benefits and the air quality need for kind of looking at this sector and looking at EV school bus electrification. There's, this is a strategy that we need to pursue in Connecticut as legislatively mandated, or else we're never going to meet our air quality goals, and our air quality goals are based on health-based standards. But that allows me to talk more about money, which is great. And I actually have a short presentation, so hopefully I should be able to get through this pretty quickly. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Just off the top slide, though, my name is Paul Kritzler. I am with Connecticut DEP Mobile Sources Group. I am the supervisor of the Mobile Sources Group, and we are interested in reducing emissions from mobile sources, cars, trucks, buses, planes, etc. Now, we've been working in this space for a while now, working fairly closely with Kevin and the Green Bank. And so we've been kind of had our hands in and been a part of all of the projects that have gone on around the state for clean school buses. In our experience, there are really three stages to these projects: the planning stage, the procurement stage, and the operation stage. And there are a lot of resources that are helpful in all of these stages. And you know, so in planning, the fleet advisory service that Kevin and the Connecticut Green Bank have set up is invaluable. It's worked very effectively in Massachusetts to help districts up there to utilize EV buses. And so I would say that's a great starting point. The World Resource Institute, as I think somebody mentioned in the comments in the chat, has a just significant amount of resources on their webpage, including plans, implementation plans. Basically, any question you could have is answered on that website. There's also third-party resources, other resources. There are groups that you can join that will have quarterly meetings to kind of talk about this process. And then I would say, you know, one of the biggest resources for planning is the municipality next door or the school district next door. There is, at this point, as Dan pointed out, a lot of EV school buses around the state, both in cities, in small towns, school districts that aren't in small towns that need to operate in those small towns like CTEX. Everybody, there's sufficient amount of expertise around the state that if you're going down this path, there is somebody that we can connect you with that has experience in answering all of the barriers. The second kind of phase of this is procurement. And that, for the most part, is about you know, writing the procurement documents, the RFPs, to get those vehicles and get the right vehicles that you need, and then largely about funding. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the third part is operation. And Dan and Kevin talked about the PURA rate structure, which solved a lot of problems about costs in operation. There's some workforce development parts, and there are resources around the state that are working on workforce development. But then you get a lot of benefits out of the operation. You get reduced maintenance costs, you get happier drivers, and you get healthier buses. If you want to talk to a driver who's driving an EV bus, you know, we can connect you with that, with somebody who has done that. They report that they can control the children better because there's less noise. There's less road noise. There's less noise from vehicles. They're going home without headaches. And you know, we also get healthier buses, but you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's a lot here: school bus procurement, EVSE installation, operation, and maintenance. There's a lot that you need to kind of consider. And the big thing here is, how do we pay for all of this? And the answer is, there is no one-stop shop for this, but there are a lot of funding resources in the state, and they're all listed here on the right side. And frankly, there's enough funding resources that demand is not exceeding the funding resources right now. And I can talk to kind of these top three here. We have two grant programs: the Connecticut DEP Diesel Emission Reduction Act, the Connecticut DEP Volkswagen grant funding, which we have about $20 million left, and then the Connecticut DEP Clean School Bus Bond funding. And then there are a number of other places to start, including the PURA pilot program that Kevin mentioned, the PURA rate setting for medium and heavy duties, all of the, you know, Green Bank funding opportunities, and then potentially EPA Clean School Bus. I mentioned it in the chat. But we are expecting that program has not actually gone away, and that we will see a future round of that. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. There are three state-level funding opportunities for clean school buses through DEP, the State Diesel Emission Reduction Act, the Volkswagen, and the Clean School Bus Supplemental Grants. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll talk to each of these. First, for the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, you can get reimbursement up to 45% of the cost of the vehicle replacement with an electric equivalent, or 60% of the cost of replacement of electric engines with a repower. Repowers don't really happen, so we're really just talking about this top point here, that the DERA program would cover 45% of the cost of the vehicle. DERA opens in October, basically, or November of every single year. It's a smaller pool of funding, and it is dependent on the federal government providing that DERA is funded every single year. We expect that to be the case again this year. But as with everything else federally funded, there are some questions there. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. The second source is VW reimbursement grants. It's a reimbursement program where we will periodically open solicitations for projects that would cover up to 65% of the cost of an electric repower or EV replacement bus for government projects, which is pretty much what all school bus projects are. And that payment comes from a trust administrator. There's one real restriction here is that there needs to be scrappage of a 2009 or older bus, which is becoming increasingly more difficult. We do have a school bus inventory in the state. We do know that there are those vehicles available in the state. And even if a district doesn't have those, we would accept what's called third-party scrappage, which is acquisition of a bus in the state that meets the requirements by a district that maybe they weren't operating. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the biggest source of funding, and that's the Connecticut Clean School Bus Supplemental Grant. And this is over $20 million of bond funding that we've been authorized to provide from the legislature. And we worked with Connecticut Green Bank earlier this year to utilize the first $6 million of that we've been allotted. And that, so we allotted and awarded about $5.4 million of that to 5 projects around the state, some of the ones that Kevin talked about, which means there's actually $14 million left there. And we're kind of just waiting to the point where projects are getting ready, shovel ready, or planning complete before we can release that. And so, you know, we don't want to release funding for that or make a solicitation for funding of that when projects might take a long time to get done. So we're looking for that kind of, have you done some initial planning? Are you committed to moving down this path? But there's a lot of funding there. There are some limitations to this program. As currently written in the statutes, this program can only fund projects that have received some level of federal funding or are anticipating applying for some level of federal funding. And we are looking to actually get a legislative change made to that that would allow us to fund projects that are utilizing some level of other funding, whether that be federal, state, or private funding. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to recap, these are the 3 kind of DEP controlled of funding. And you know, I understand there can be a lot of questions about those, but if you're interested, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I think as our contact information, you can email myself. We also have dep.mobilesources@ct.gov. If you have questions, we also on our website for DEP have a number of listservs that you can sign up to know when we are releasing funding in the state. And if you can't find those on the website, just email me and we'll get you signed up to those as well. So that's it, I believe, for me. Any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Paul. Now we'll be open to a quick round of questions. I'll invite Peter to support us with the questions in the chat. I'm not sure if they all have been responded. I'll also
we did have a lot of good questions in the chat. I think most of them got answered. I'm just trying to see if there's any that haven't. So from what I've been reading, it looks like most of the federal federal dollars is drying up. Is CT planning on investing more money into help districts? I think Paul kind of covered that. There is a lot of federal money drying up. It's not exactly certain. There's still hope for the EPA Clean School Bus funding too. But to offset that, the state of Connecticut does have a lot of good programs that we can utilize. Yep.
If
A question
anyone,
about long school bus trips, right? This actually came up with us too. We had a private school that was trying to work on this specific case, Choate. This is the hardest area for school buses to electrify if you're going on a long school bus trip for athletics. But we like to emphasize this is a transition. So working on your short routes first is important and probably the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, it's important to get started, right? There's not going to be the perfect solution to transition immediately, but starting and taking advantage of those that can be converted to electrification first, and as technology progresses and costs come down, eventually getting the whole fleet converted is the goal. But starting now, getting used to it, what operation changes need to take place, what considerations need to be taken with how the buses are used, and working those kinks out with small quantities before converting everything over.
if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to raise your hands and open your microphones or insert them in the chat. We are in the final minutes of the webinar.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering, I'm with the school district. Ultimately, who is going to legally be responsible? Like looking in the chats, if M&J Bus Company is saying that this is not feasible, they're not going to do it, but it's mandated. If they own the buses that we contract with,
Right.
if they refuse to buy them, who's ultimately responsible for this? Is this a vendor thing? Is this a municipality problem? I know it's both, but from a legal standpoint, I suppose.
I can try that. I do ultimately think it's a mandate on the municipalities, right? But we have a situation where we work with a lot of bus companies. So it has to be a conversation between the town and the bus company contract. The towns that this has been successful in, like Brantford, started this conversation with their busing contract, right? And their provider. They ultimately ended up moving to a new provider, right? But that was a long-term conversation. And Brantford's a place where they're very open to this. So I do think it's about starting the conversation with M&J and talking with the Green Bank too, to see what a schedule looks like. But it's about starting that conversation, right? So M&J might come from the perspective of, yes, this is very expensive, but they also might have not modeled all the different funding scenarios for the town.
Okay.
Hey, Peter, can you hear me? This is Jean Cronin from the Connecticut School Transportation Association.
Yep.
Yes, go
Hi
ahead, Jane.
there. I'm going to actually put it on my camera. I don't know if you folks can see me. And that was a good question from the person who just asked. And first of all, I want to thank you. This has been a fantastic presentation from you folks, from the Green Bank to Deep to Charles at Save the Sound. You folks have been great on this program. From the school bus side, I would like to say that the conversation starts with the towns, right? Somebody asked that question. So the towns have to reach out to their transportation provider. They need to be talking now. It's a long process because you need to figure out, we've been talking to the utility companies. It takes a year to figure out how to get a site upgraded and make sure it has the proper amount of electricity to be charging vehicles. So you need to start those conversations early. You also need to put it in your RFP. You need to phase it in because you have to buy these buses and they're 3 times as much as a diesel, which, that needs to be considered. You also have the other school pressures of the school budget. So it needs to start with the towns. It needs to start now. It can't happen overnight. It's kind of a phase in, but the bus companies will work with you, but it's a hand in hand that you're going to need to, the towns are going to need to pay for these buses in their contracts. That's what it's all going to come down to. So it's going to be a partnership between the municipalities and their school bus companies. But we certainly want to work with you. We've got a lot of resources. I'm excited about the grants. I hope they continue because that's really how this program is going to be working with the subsidies. But you've got to have those conversations now. And remember, it's a long planning process. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just want to thank Jean as well for jumping in on that, and I endorse what she's shared. I just want to flag that I did link the latest messaging from EPA, which is that they're now signaling publicly that they're going to disperse funds for the application round, where operators and schools were able to apply just before the administration changed. So that's a positive development. There are a number of Connecticut school bus operators that did apply in for that round. So there could be an opportunity to hopefully pair those awards with the deep funding that Paul described and green bank financing as well. And then I think it was Meg in the chat who asked about vans and school transportation vehicles. That's a use case that I'm hearing a lot of interest in from school bus operators, given the number of those vehicles that are in their fleets. And I just shared that at the Green Bank, we're internally assessing whether those vehicles are a good fit for our resources, especially because I'd say the cost differential is less than it is on the bus side. So it could be a good fit for low interest, long-term financing.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I think we may have time for one last question. Do we have any other questions remaining in the chat for our last one? I believe not. So with that, we will finalize our webinar for today. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to all speakers. It was incredible to have you here. Thank you for dedicating your time and expertise to support school districts in our state. And as next steps, I will be sharing the recording with everyone and slides as well. We have a resources binder for school districts. We will be sharing these resources along with the slides, and also a form for anyone who's interested in receiving technical assistance. So thank you all for being here today. And we truly appreciate everyone's presence. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.